Hi, everyone. This is the acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. It is Friday, April 10th. Happy weekend, everybody. And today I'm going to take a look at the upcoming square between the Sun and Pluto. Now, the Sun is also getting in on a square with Jupiter. We're going to kind of focus on Pluto today, but I'll throw in some Jupiterian twists along the way. This is a significant transit to look at throughout the month. Happens a couple of times a year, right? Every time that the Pluto is very slow moving. Every time that the Sun right now gets into one of its cardinal signs, it's going to be opposed, square, or conjoined with Pluto. So we're familiar with this aspect. Usually lasts about a week in total, with maybe a period of about 3 or 4 days where it's really intense. Let's take a look at it, and then I'll give you a sense of what you can expect from this archetypal combination. So here's the Sun in Aries, and here's Pluto and Jupiter in Capricorn, and the square is happening. It's within 3 degrees right now, getting to within that 3-degree range, which ancient astrologers called an engagement. It's sort of like game on. So once that happens, you can start feeling it. And this is coming in over the weekend. So let's take a look. By Sunday, right, it's early in the morning, it's closing in. By Monday, it's starting to perfect, and it'll actually go all the way through. Let me redo this here. So you see 2505, it's passing over by early Tuesday morning. So over the weekend, you'll really feel it intensifying. It's perfecting Monday and Tuesday. So we're in that kind of week-long range right about now. And it may intensify and pick up quite a bit Sunday, Monday, Tuesday morning. But you'll feel it today and tomorrow starting to pick up quite a bit, like I said. So in the meantime, right after that, the Sun will go through a square with Jupiter in Capricorn. And you can see that playing out by Wednesday. So that one, they're right. Jupiter and Pluto, of course, are sandwiched together right now. So that's why you're seeing that. Now, in the meantime, we're just past a full moon. The moon is in Scorpio, about to shift gears into Sagittarius. So over the weekend, things get real fiery. The nice thing is the backdrop of the moon in Sagittarius provides a kind of Jupiterian lift. The bad news is that lots of fire with the Sun heading into a square with Pluto and Jupiter's in its fall. The fire and the lift of Jupiter may be dampened a bit by the Jupiter-Pluto dynamic. I laugh because it's just like, we're all like, astrologers are all like waving the white flag, like, okay. So we've been dealing with this Jupiter-Pluto dynamic for quite some time. It's going to be with us for the rest of the year. So I'm just trying to make friends with it personally. Anyway, let's go ahead and I'm going to take this off the screen now, and then let's talk about what you can expect from this transit. What kinds of archetypal combinations show up when the Sun and Pluto get together? Well, let's talk about the Sun for starters. It always helps to just refresh on what the Sun means. There are many levels of meaning in with every planet. So the Sun, for example, can represent the father, or the Sun can represent fame or rank or knowledge or being select or special in some way. Why? Because when the Sun comes out, everything else disappears and there's just that one thing. So it tends to represent leaders or people who stand out or who are select or famous or special in some way. It's also associated with knowledge, real knowledge, higher knowledge, not just knowledge in the realm of opinion, like I have a lot of knowledge about fashion trends and a lot of opinions about it or something like that, which is kind of a different category of knowledge in ancient astrology. True knowledge would mean like dharma, the knowledge of the essence of things that transcends all different kinds of kind of relativistic distinctions. Like I know what truth is, I know what a lie is versus what truth is. The Sun represents the organ of perception for the soul. So in that sense, it's related to the ability to perceive higher truth. And there's always that kind of higher esoteric level to the Sun. Actually, the famous sort of medieval scholar and modern Christian mystic C.S. Lewis, he wrote the Narnia Chronicles, all 7 of them, with one of the 7 particular planets, the medieval astrologers, in mind. And he sort of Christologized them. There's a great book about this called Planet Narnia. If you look back in my archives, you can also find a talk with the author of that book and a movie that came out about it called the Narnia Code. Anyway, the sun book, the solar book in Lewis's Narnia Chronicles was called The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And of course, the dawn is the rising of the sun, and that book is all about the sun. So if you want a really fun exploration of solar symbolism, you could read it with your kids if you have it. I've read it to my daughter already. Check out Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It's an actually awesome study in solar symbolism. But of course, solar symbolism also has to do with that ideal. It's the ideal self, it's the higher self, it's the soul, and it is reflection of divinity within the cosmos. And that, for that reason, the sun was put at the center of the astrological paradigm. So the sun has this kind of higher esoteric connection to spirit and to higher knowledge and truth and divinity and the indwelling soul. But also, in a worldly sense, when we forget about that, we get a kind of shadow version of the sun, which sometimes we call the ego. It's just that temporary sense of I that we live with. It's not bad or evil necessarily. But when it forgets that it is a humble, temporary servant of the higher self and of our divine source, then it tends to run amok. And that's where we get the shadow side of the sun, which is that egocentric tendency. So the sun can pertain to the sort of the ego, or that sense of false pride, autonomy, and power, being separate, isolated little king or queen in our own little kingdoms. And so the sun represents that as well. The sun can be also representative of things that are like the head of an organization, the CEO, a king, an emperor, a queen, something like that. There's lots of solar symbolism. Solar symbolism also has to do with that sense of loyalty, of honor, dignity, nobility, like a good king or a good queen who serves the divine mandate. The sense of needing to keep society together. The sun is a picture, in some sense, of the, let's say, the ideal sense of what a leader should be in a civilization or society. They are the manifestation of divine order and cohesion around which the civilization can revolve, which is why kings in the old days, even if it was not ideal by any means, kings were also lawgivers. So the sun is related to that sense of higher order. It's the thing that sits at the center and everything else revolves around it. And so when the sun goes through any kind of transit, there's always a chance that that which is at the center, that which holds everything together, is in some ways fundamentally challenged or changed. And then also we have different versions of that. Some people like to try to control and keep everything together through will and might, and others are more noble, more generous, more virtuous, more heart-centered. And we have displays of that kind of self and that kind of leadership in the world, like all over the place. So those are just a few things about the sun. Now, on the other hand, we have Pluto, who is the raw, libidinal, aggressive, primal, instinctual, intense, dark, potentially demonic forces of catharsis, purgation, cleansing, purification, and empowerment. And Pluto is associated with regeneration or transfiguration. I don't like to use the word transformation because everything's transforming all the time. I don't like to use the word death and rebirth because it's just a boring, cliched phrase. So that, you go into an astrology reading and they're like, well, you've had it really rough, so you're going to experience a death and a rebirth, or you've had many and you're a level 10 healer because of it, right? Like, some of these things may be true, but like if there was an astrological quarter jar, we would be like, no one would have to worry about like not having a job because of the coronavirus right now, because we'd have so much money in that jar for the amount of time that people have spent using those cliches in astrological readings. Seriously, I think it's probably the most heard cliche probably the cliche that I've heard the most in 10 years. So death and rebirth, we're going to just set it aside. Transfiguration is different. Transfiguration has the sense of the crucifixion and resurrection. Transfiguration means that something fundamental about how you are or who you are is completely transformed, and usually through crucible and crisis. And it doesn't feel Like, the death and rebirth phrase often just makes people tend to focus on the rebirth. But the transfiguration means that there's some kind of crucible or crisis in the very fundamental fibers of what you are or what you're doing or the way that something is. And usually it is transformed by some kind of purifying confrontation with power and darkness. So, anyway, that's a little bit of Sun Pluto on their own. Now, when we combine them, what do we get? Well, this is the square. Squares are of the nature of Mars. The sun is exalted in Aries right now, so it's quite a powerful and kind of exaggerated sun. And then, of course, you have Pluto, who is also being sort of amplified by Jupiter right now. So when you put these two together, here are some of the things that you get. You can have the sun can be compelled by Pluto to become very intense and charismatic. The word charisma actually means to be, I heard this recently from my guru, actually. He loves to talk about etymologies, which I love too. And the word charisma has a relationship to almost being like touched by the devotion and enthusiasm of God, like the word enthusiastic and theos, the God within. So the idea of being suddenly the ego or the personality becoming infused with a kind of really intense, compelling charisma, that's a Sun-Pluto dynamic. Now, it can be dark or it can be light. It can be to mobilize the will and to do something great, heroic, noble, generous, virtuous, to take charge, to take action, to be a leader. And that can be a good thing. On the other hand, the dark side of this same complex is going to be the same feeling of charisma, but with selfish, undermining, manipulative, domineering tendencies. So we have to watch for that. Even, there's kind of like where there's a will, there's a way. That's the Sun Pluto. And even things that look good on the surface or that are very idealistic can sometimes be corrupted by a kind of intensity. I'm hell bent on something, and it doesn't matter what gets in my way. So be careful of that right now. Those who cannot compromise do not die wise. That's a good phrase to remember, because compromise is a part of life, and we don't have any chance to learn grace, mercy, forgiveness, surrender. We don't have a chance to see the interconnectedness of all things if we aren't good at making compromises. So when something doesn't go our way, when something isn't as we'd like it to be, when we feel that there's been some moral failing or that someone or even ourselves have really missed the mark, and we can become a ruthless, almost like slave driver of ourselves, just like, cracking the whip and just being like, you fell short. And that feeling of needing to correct something that's wrong. The Sun Pluto can be a ruthless judge. And without compromise, we don't die wise. So there is some need to be able to see the imperfection in life and to bless it, because we realize that in this world, there's never going to be a time when everything is perfect, because we're looking in the wrong place. If we look to politicians, if we look to the economy, if we look to jobs, if we look to lovers, if we look at all these things and we say, well, mostly what we're going to see is everything's always missing the mark. So if we want to see the indwelling spirit soul, we have to learn how to accept things that fail in some ways or that fall short of the ideal. And this is something that can really, if we don't think in this way, we can really sort of completely, we can suffer a great deal or make others suffer with the Sun square Pluto. Now, this also will have to do with the ego and shadow and the ego and power. So, each of us have a shadow side, and the Sun Pluto can draw it out, make us see it just right in front of our faces. And that can be a really good thing. In that sense, it's purgatorial, it's healing, it's revealing, it's exercising our demons in a certain sense. But to name something, one thing that people don't always understand about the New Testament is that there was, people will read the stories of Jesus, and they'll think, wow, he had these totally miraculous powers, like sometimes in the Christian church when I grew up, people would be like, Jesus could call out demons, and that no one could ever do this. And actually that's not true, because there was a long history in that part of the world, and also in the Jewish tradition, of calling out demons from people. One of the ways you can tell, and I learned this from a theology professor when I was in school, is that there's a tradition of needing the name of a demon before you can call it out. But unless you have the name of the demon, you can't call it out. Once you get its name, then you can call it out. And anyway, I don't have the details of this fully, so people who are more in the know about this uh, than me, please fill us in. But at any rate, I always remember this, and especially when it comes to Sun-Pluto transits, because there's a way in which we can't call something out until it's named. And naming in our vocabulary might just be, in the sort of modern psychological vocabulary, might just be coming to see and understand a pattern, and then we have a name for it. And we don't like, it's really hard to call ourselves out, because we tend to be so extreme. We tend to either, oh, I love myself, or I hate myself. And so people say, I'm not gonna work on myself. I'm not a perfectionist. I'm just gonna revel in what I am, like that. But actually, that all that's doing is just sort of, it betrays an underlying belief that I'm either everything or I'm nothing. Right? Our egos are so fragile if we can't call ourselves out and just be nice to ourselves as we call ourselves out. So it's grabbing something, so that the naming of something of our own shadow, it's okay. You could, we can be nice to ourselves, like calling something out, So, what removes darkness? Ultimately, forgiveness, kindness, and internal compromise. Being able to say, yeah, there's a little demon in me, and then I've named it, and now I've asked it to leave, and I might have to keep up my efforts around it, but I'm not like, I'm not going to start, like, what's the girl from The Exorcist who starts like vomiting everywhere? Like, it doesn't have to be super crazy. So anyway, death and rebirth of solar figures, or the intensification or empowerment of solar figures. Solar figures being kings, leaders, CEOs, fathers, anyone who has a central organizing role, or who has some semblance of power and authority in the world. You can see these figures going through death right now. Literally, we can see leaders die. I know, for example, as this transit has been applying, I think the prime minister was Boris Johnson. I think that's his name. He was in ICU, and I think he's been released now. But at any rate, you can see this kind of death and rebirth of solar figures. I said it. Oh. Okay, I said it, so I have to put. Okay, I have a nickel. I'm gonna start a little jar. Put it right there. So he went through a crisis. He has gone through a crisis, and you can actually see leaders or solar figures die. This will happen during Pluto Sun transits. You can also see transformation and healing around leaders in terms of their, like if you have a tough relationship with your dad, you can see the substantive changes in that relationship as healing also takes place. So at any rate, you can also see, let's see, sometimes like your boss under a Pluto Sun transit will sort of show their dark side, and you'll just be like, whoa. Or anyone that you've idealized as kind of like a solar figure may just show something of their ego, and you'll be like, that's stinky, But it's also an opportunity, again, to take people off of pedestals. Sometimes the worst thing that we can do for ourselves is to put people way up here on pedestals, even if they have a really important role, or they're famous, or they have some leadership position. And if we put them up on pedestals, then oftentimes we're really disappointed when they fall off. Whereas from the beginning, if we learn how to idealize what someone has that's good without kind of dehumanizing them, then we don't have to suffer so much later. So sometimes the Sun-Pluto dynamic will involve getting people knocked off pedestals that we put them on, only to realize, hopefully, that we don't really need to put people up on pedestals. We can put the best of people up on pedestals while still recognizing that they're human. So self-conquest is also a big part of Sun-Pluto. Let me master myself. Pluto can be about domination, will, and authority, and whether it is a dark or light expression of that. The will, the ego, power, authority can be deeply, like almost like it gets like a shot of like primordial instinctual libidinal power, which can be good if we have a noble cause. But it can be bad if it is empowering us to be more egotistical, selfish, or domineering. The tendency to be obsessively self-interested or self-focused. Look at me, I'm so great. Everything, everything revolves around me. The only thing that is worth thinking about is me and what's going on with me. So that can be, and it can become almost like compulsive and really obsessive when Pluto and the sun get together. On the other hand, there is this idea of Pluto representing that which is taboo. And for many of us, we're really afraid to say what we feel or think, or we are trying to live our lives in a way that will make us popular or liked, or will fit into some kind of societally recognized framework. And Sun Pluto can represent a moment of empowerment that allows us to speak out from the trappings or the walls of that kind of complex. So the facing of taboos around being oneself. Of course, in this culture, it's like anyone who wants to act out and has no control over their mind or their will or their speech or whatever will often use this as a way of justifying childish behavior. For example, if you go on Instagram, there's just a parade of memes these days that's like saying all kinds of pretty childish, selfish, stupid stuff, and then putting something right under it that says, "I'm empowered, I'm sovereign, I'm awesome," right? Like that. So that would not be facing the taboo of being oneself. That would be, that's a kind of manipulation of an idea about self-empowerment to justify expressions of immaturity often. And we all know what that's like. Like I've walked that, I walk that line all the time, right? I'm not saying that I'm above it or anything, and you probably aren't either, right? Like, what it's like to just tilt into that, like, I'm going to be empowered today, when it's like, yeah, you're in a bad mood and you're going to say something crappy, you know what I mean? So anyway, to overcome the sky god, the terrible father, something that's really, I think, kind of interesting about Aries is that Aries often needs to confront an invisible or assumed tyrannical overarching authority figure, often in the face of God or a father or some challenger. And there's sometimes a reality to that Aries has to step up, find strength, Aries Mars, and courage in the face of some kind of thwarting oppressive force or figure. But this can also become a kind of complex where people are always, in a sense, trying to challenge or stand up to something that they imagine that's actually just in their head, right? And so what's the fine line between trying to conquer what feels like an oppressive force and stand up to it, and on the other hand, recognizing that we may have an inability to just stand comfortably in our power without having to get into power plays or theatrics around power. So there's a kind of a fine line for all of us there. Now, the other thing is that with so much fire energy in the air over the weekend, remember that fire likes to mold the world to its will. So the shape the world according to my will. And that's the kind of stubbornness of fire. Remember, fire as an element is hot and dry. And the dryness of fire is very willful and kind of stubborn. And so very willful kind of weekend coming through, potentially with the real intensification of these primordial, instinctual, aggressive, libidinal powers with Jupiter and Pluto conjoined. Jupiter kind of makes it even bigger. So you have to be careful that we're not trying to mold something to our will to the point where we break something. And we don't want to, anytime that we're like, I'm going to break that dog, I'm going to break that and make it, mold it to my will or whatever. Usually something in us breaks in the process. So it's not always a great idea. But on the other hand, in terms of getting things done and in terms of shaping things with a lot of energy, this weekend certainly gives us that all the way into early next week. So if you're getting things done and you're being sane, it's really good energy to have around. Then you also have sorry, just funny stuff coming into my head. You also have the potential for destructive and creative impulses to be combined in really weird ways. For example, I think I've told this story before, but when I was in graduate school, I was writing a draft of my first book about ayahuasca, and what I did, I got to this point where I realized that the draft that I had written was not the book I wanted to write. And so, I took the draft that I had out back on the grill, and I like poured lighter fluid on it, and I like lit it, and I like danced, or I don't know what I did. So it was, something like that, where it's like this transfiguration of the material, the creative material, where there's some sense of needing to burn something down and start again, where there's this compelling force of saying like, I need to create something, and it's like a birthing instinct, but it's very powerful and can be kind of domineering, and that's why it can be like, yeah, and as I go, I'll just be like, the goddess Kali, and I'll just destroy the earth, and so to be a little, there's kind of a destroyer energy with Mars and Pluto as well. I think I mentioned the rest of this stuff. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think I only said death and rebirth and transformation a couple of times, so I only owe a couple of quarters. But, and then by the way, like one of the reasons I rag on a lot of astrological cliches, but the reason that I rag on them is because they were so programmed into me when I started that it's taken a lot of work for me to really rework vocabulary and become present enough to find new ways of saying things, because otherwise what we're trying to get at, which the phrase death and rebirth does get at, and so does transformation, but what we're trying to get at ends up feeling dead. It's like nominalism. I don't know if anyway, I won't go into this philosophy, but language in our craft has a way of getting deadened over time. And so I feel like as readers, we're also always wordsmiths, because in order to learn how to speak astrology, you have to learn how to read. And when you're reading, you start to recognize where new things spark new connections in your like associative archetypal memory banks. And then you start forming new ways of thinking and holding the archetypal symbols like a jewel you're turning all the time, and the light's kind of cascading off in different directions. If you don't have some new way of reframing the language, it's problematic. But anyways, just so that everyone realizes my own little dark shadow side, I had to put a quarter in the jar today of my own. So I would love to hear from you. What are your favorite astrological cliches? The ones that you hear all the time. I'd love to hear some of those. That might be funny to hear. Also, tell me how you are doing with this Sun square Pluto dynamic and anything else that's going on right now. How are you faring out there? Blessings and prayers to all of you who are serving on the front lines of the crisis right now. Blessings to all of you who have to work. Blessings to those of you who are dealing with sick family members. Blessings to those of you who are afraid. Blessings to those of you who are dealing with difficulty in finances or hardships. May you be held in God's love and light. May you find trust and resourcefulness and courage in your hearts. May you dwell on good and glad things. So just a little good vibes for everyone today. Last but not least, remember that starting in June, in the middle of June, all three of my new courses are starting. My horary course, my second year course, and my first year course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. We are rapidly filling up. A lot of people are interested in studying. It's a great time to study astrology. You can check it out on my website, nightlightastrology.com. There is an early bird rate that's in effect right now. You save $500 off the cost of the one-year program. But we're also open to need-based tuition. People can use our sliding scale, and we really aren't turning people away because of the coronavirus situation. So if you want to study, you're in a difficult situation financially, please be sure to take advantage of that. Okay, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you all have a great weekend. Take it easy.